Hello and welcome. This is the Focus Masterclass podcast, where we speak to some of the great minds in visual effects to dive deep into every part of the industry, from production, the creative process, business, and technology. In this edition, MPC Production Side VFX Supervisor Charley Henley talks about creatures. He lets us in on the step-by-step process of designing a creature and the methods for achieving creatures in film. Please enjoy Charley Henley's masterclass.
Hello. Today, I wanted to talk about the work that I've done with creatures. Depending very much on the project and the character, you may already know what you need to do, but in a lot of cases, this is open. It's open to creatively, and the director or production company are looking for input from VFX. Concept designers are the key kind of original first port of call generally. They're often working in remotely, or we have like obviously MPC art department. On a number of projects I've done, we've used quite a few different concept artists to sort of brainstorm what all the potential. So the first port of call is to go out there with a basic brief and a script, and as much as the director or references you can find in the writing or reference images that have been found, and then spread that amongst a number of people to get a kind of fresh potential for fresh ideas, unless you have something very solid to start with. So you can sort of do a brainstorming session with a number of different concept artists, and then hopefully from that you can home in. And sometimes there's previous projects. So Ridley, for example, on Alien had a load of concept work that had been done for Prometheus that we could draw on, and he had some quite clear ideas about which concepts he liked for the characters. And then if you can, hopefully you'll lock on to some just drawings which explain what you're after. And but there's always the challenge of mixing up what the creature looks like with the character of the creature. So hopefully potentially through research, discussing, understanding with the director what the character is, you can gear some of your concepts to embellish the character, because you may find it's very much about the pose, the look. How that character's portrayed in a concept drawing can kind of sell it or not. It's there's a tricky process there, but generally we also call on a lot of references potentially from the real world. For the mice, we in Cinderella we looked through different types of mice, whereas for the lizard in Cinderella, we knew we wanted something that was British-based, a British-based animal, but there aren't many lizards, and there's a particular lizard that's quite rare. So we ended up we were unable to go and reference that or photograph it because they're so rare in reality. So we had to go just by photographs off the internet. So you gather what you can. Then if hopefully you've locked down and everyone's agreed with the basics in a concept design, then you want to go a bit deeper. You need to understand what this creature looks like in 3D. Obviously, the flat 2D version is an interpretation at a certain angle, and often when you start bringing that into 3 dimensions, you get very different creatures, or the 2-dimensional concept doesn't explain what that 3D character is. So there's a lot of development that needs to be done in 3 dimensions. ZBrush sculpting is part of that concept, and it depends on the concept artist. They might go straight into that, or we obviously have a team at MPC that would then take that on and start sculpting 3D models within the computer. But there's also practical clay sculpting, which we did a lot on Alien, because we had a creature department who was actually focusing a lot of the creature design was focused through the practical creature department, and they built they had different teams. Some were doing ZBrush, some were building it with clay, some was sculpting full-size sort of latex models, but a lot of it was done with clay sculpts to start with. And then that proved very practical for Ridley to go and look at as it was being sculpted and make notes, and then they'd adjust it very interactively. And sometimes the computer-generated like ZBrush sculpts are not immediately tangible to a director or production designer. So potentially you can print the CG, the models, and then get a better understanding of the shape of the creature. Part of that sort of design focus stage is also to look at motion. So it's key to get some motion tests in early before you kind of lock down in the final look, because you've got the physical properties of any kind of creature affect how it moves. If you've got very long, thin legs, you might walk in a lighter way or fast like a greyhound. If you're heavy and short, stubby legs, you're going to have a much more plodding motion. Whether how bipedal or quadruped you are, the character is, will determine on how natural it looks moving upright or on all fours. So we had a lot of these sort of challenges with the xenomorph alien creature and the neomorph, because Ridley wanted a real mixture of motions. He really liked the elegance and speed of greyhounds, but also the kind of we found some praying mantises that had some really strange ways of moving with what felt like sort of double jointed hips, and then bring that into some concepts where he really enjoyed the body limbs in very kind of extreme positions. All these sort of different visions of the character had to come together. So it was a constant sort of cycle of animation tests back into body proportions, and then back into animation to get the proportions right for the creatures. In that design focus stage, you're also going to be very interested in textures. References for textures are very important, especially if you've got a fully CG character, because the surface texture is often one of the main challenges in trying to make something seem photoreal and not CG. So you need materials that are realistic. So finding good real materials help a lot. So there's a lot of research that goes into that. Real world references, real world photography. If there's costumes and clothes, then that's also a challenge. So references are always good. So then you've focused down on what your creature is. You've got all these references, but you still need to present it well. And I mean, as I said, I've kind of gone over some of that, but there's the presenting and realizing of that, trying to lock down that final design before you're fully into post-production. Things that help that might be the 3D printing of the CG. There may be the virtual reality testing, which is pretty useful. More animation tests to show really how the character is going to move. Full-size body sculpt and material samples. So a lot of the last stuff I was talking about folds into that presentation. On the Jungle Book, we had quite a good system of doing a test shot. So it's as if each character had to do a little, as if he was having an audition, a little motion test and say a few lines. And there was obviously a fair bit of animation work in that, and a scene that was set up to see them all in. So it was consistent look dev scene. So through look dev, we locked off the creatures, and that worked very well, I think, to solidify. So if you've got your design perhaps, but then you move into the next challenge, which is really how are you going to create this creature in the filming environment. a lot of what we talked about is sort of presuming that it's fully CG, but there's certainly different options. It's not that any fantastical creature has to be CG by any means, and traditionally they obviously weren't. And there's still a big demand and appetite for traditional methods. So throughout the creatures, unless you're this, it sort of comes down to three key methods that I've used anyway over those films that we've talked about. You've got something that's really practical based. So that would be effectively like a man in the suit. You might have the engineers, for example, on Prometheus were based on men in suits, 7-foot men with platforms in suits. You've got fully CG, obviously, or you've got like a hybrid approach. The fully CG would generally on set have references, and just to get, well, there's a whole list of different references that you might bring to the table. We'll go over that. And then you've got the hybrid approach, which is really where you're combining CG with something practical on set and not just replacing the whole what you've done. The hybrid approach is really what has interested me recently. I've enjoyed the mix and the crossover of the different departments. One of the films that Mr. X did was the Merman. The film was The Shape of Water, and they had a merman in there, which was effectively a man in the suit, but the face was replaced pretty much consistently throughout. So those are the three key approaches: practical based, fully CG, or a hybrid.
Thank you so much, Charlie. So we'll go into a bit of a Q&A here now. My first question is, what's the most important part of creature design that you think really makes a creature come alive as a character? I'm probably assuming this. I feel like when you design something, then maybe it's a design, but it's not yet a character. Do you know what I mean? So I'm curious,
Yeah. That's a good question.
What makes it come alive?
Yeah, I think really, I mean, sometimes you look at a concept and it feels like there's a character in there. It's deep, and that can be to do with the pose or the situation that it's in. And other times you'll see a concept that is very, that is more. It shows you a shape and it shows you a form and colors, and that might be cool, but there's no depth of character. So even at the concept stage, that character can be seen or not seen, I think. And sometimes the best concepts are almost very rough. The ones that Ridley would keep referring to when we were trying to get the design often really didn't show the design. They showed the character, and then we'd find, oh, it's just not feeling right, but it may be that it's the character that's not coming through rather than the details of the skin and the proportions and the body and how many teeth it had. It's often is really the character. So we had sketches, and there was one in particular for the Neomorph that was really rough, but it had the character because the framing of it was like framed as if it was in a shot. It was framed in action. It was kind of scary. You couldn't see most of it anyway, so it was pretty useless as a concept to build a full creature off. But as a character, it was good. So these two things are all together. The character, though, also tends to evolve a lot through production. That's the thing. So you might try and nail a character in a concept, which is always a good thing to try and do, because I think that sells the concept most of the time, as you kind of described. But then you start, depending on it, there's the animation of it, and that might reference some real creatures. Like for the mice, each of the four, I think there were four mice a while ago now, they all had to have a different character. So there was but in the end, they all look like mice. I mean, the little one was obviously a bit cuter. There's one that looked like Dad, but ultimately, the character came in the motion of them. In how quickly and jumpy and skittish they were, or how slow and lazy they moved. So it's the animation really brings it to life at that point. That might be an animator referencing real creatures and bringing in some kind of anthropomorphic character to it if it's non-humanoid. But you could also have actors bringing that in. So we had for the neomorph. Well, we tried everything with the neomorph because it was really hard to sell it. In the end, it was probably the character of a praying mantis that was, watching videos of it that was the biggest inspiration. But we brought an actor in who had a really amazing shaped body and creepy way to move, and videoed his movements to try and grab the character, to try and bring the creature to life, and allow Ridley to direct some of that. And then you have characters actors that might be like, you might have you might be motion capturing an actor's performance, and then if it's quite ordinary creature, they'll just bring that directly to the screen. So it's evolving, but yeah, as I said, it's great if you can capture it at the beginning and then follow through, but it tends to evolve.
How different is the process or the approach when you're creating a creature from scratch as opposed to when you're creating it based on an already established story, like from a book, for instance, or from a previous film, like if you're creating a sequel?
I think in that case, it's sometimes harder because everybody always wants something most of the time. I mean, obviously you might just be copying something, but they generally say, "Oh, we've got to do it, bigger, badder, better, bolder, cooler, in the next one." And so even if you're building off a previous character, you often want to try and take it a step further.
Yeah.
So I mean, sometimes it makes it harder because you're living up to something. I mean, certainly the alien creature suffered from that because you could never really beat the original, and I think the original Alien worked so well because you didn't see much of it because of its own limitations, amongst other things. But also the practical version was so great. But then when it wasn't great, you just didn't shoot that, So
Yeah.
whereas when it's CG, it's like, oh, we presume we can shoot everything and cover everything, and then you tend to show more than you need to, but it's trying to live up to something that was great because half of it was in the imagination of the people watching it. So that was super hard, and I really, that's one example. But other things come from books, or from previous. Then it's a kind of, again, it has that challenge of, does it live up to the audience's imagination? I think, and is it, sometimes it ends up being kind of, well, it's a tricky one. It goes back to that character thing. Like, you want it needs to fit the character for the script and the director and the audience, and if the audience know the character, they've got to have an idea of it. But I think the approach, there's not one that's easier than the other, I suppose, but it's a little different. Like, you probably do a bit less brainstorming if you're side of it, if you're based off a previous character, and it's more like you're straight into focusing. Whereas if it's a completely new one, you may go quite wide. But it just changes.
Thank you so much, Charlie, for being with us today and for your very insightful masterclass. We look forward to having you for your next masterclass with us.
Thank you very much.
If you enjoyed this masterclass podcast, please sign up to our newsletter at thefocus.com/subscribe to keep up with future podcasts as well as get the latest visual effects content, tailored job alerts, and virtual learning materials straight to your inbox. You can also subscribe, follow, or like us on our social media channels at The Focus Careers. We'll share the links to those channels in the description. We'll speak again next time.